broadcast today, or at least this program today, is going to be a little bit more for deputies, officers, certainly those at the MPD officer, deputies with the Mobile County Sheriff's Office. It's going to be geared toward a lot of the correction officers that work at the jail, and certainly the civilians that carry and support the workload of the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, but also with any other officer in any other agency here in Mobile County or even across the state or the country, because the things I'm going to talk about today really systemically are the things that bring discontent, failure of leadership, and those are the things that affect you the most. There'll also be a lot of things to learn from you, the average everyday citizen that's watching this podcast. You're gonna hear a little bit about what the systemic problems are within the rank and file of some of these law enforcement agencies, and I can assure you, you're not going to want to miss it. Come on back. Hey guys, thank you for coming on back to the program. Look, so we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, and I know the last couple of podcasts really have been us talking a lot about leadership and what that looks like. And I think it's important because you, the public, need to know how a lot of these leaders act. I'm not saying it's all of them. I'm just simply saying that a lot of these leaders in government functions and government capacities, this is how they do, this is how they act, and that's why you see so much discontent within the rank and file with a lot of these agencies. That's why there's a lot of attrition in some regards, because, officers that really want to do a good job usually go to another agency and trying to find something other than the office politics or the political interference that prevents them from doing their jobs. My leadership style was, in my opinion, it was really, really simple. Yes, in law enforcement, it is a paramilitary organization. You can't get around that at all. It is inundated with rules and regulations, and it has to be. Because litigation and complaints and the like go hand in hand with any type of civilian police department, or any type of law enforcement office, just because of the very nature of the job. The goal of a peace officer, whether you're deputies, state police, city police, or even federal police in many regards, the goal of law enforcement really is compliance. And so I don't think that a lot of law enforcement agencies, in my opinion, show a lot of discretion. And we spend so much time doing a lot of these programs in the community. Some of them are because, we get federal grants. Grants require you to do some portion of community outreach. But the goal of law enforcement really is compliance. It's that simple. And most of law-abiding citizens are going to comply with the rules, regulations, the laws of the state that guide us in a civil society. And that's important because, unfortunately, there's still a small number of those in every community that operate, criminally. They operate nefariously, always trying to skirt the law, do things that they shouldn't be doing. So really the laws are really made for those people. But we, as peace officers, have to understand really what our goal and what our mindset is when we come into law enforcement. And I've just happen to believe that most officers, deputies, correction officers, they are all coming in with a mindset that, I'm trying to give back to my community. I'm trying to get in where I fit in. And that looks different for different people for whatever reason. Even the civilians that come and work for civilian populations and law enforcement agencies, they play a huge support role. And we don't give them enough credit, in my opinion. The focus always seems to be on law enforcement officers, deputies, patrolmen. And the same could be said to dispatchers and operators. And I think they play a huge function in many regards, because as dispatchers, they are really the front line of that call from help from you, the citizens, when that call comes in. And when you're having a problem and you need somebody, you need a dispatcher or an operator that is competent, somebody that can handle stress under loads, for sure, and be able to get those calls out immediately. While they're taking information from you, they're multitasking and sending information out to the officers, trying to get those officers out there as soon as they can to that situation to help you resolve your problems. But today's podcast really is about how do deputies, how do officers, correction officers, civilians, how do we fix the systemic problems that create a lot of problems for you at your house, for you at your job, right? Because we all know that cliques rule today. If the leader's having an affair with a man or a woman, whoever the leader may be, a lot of times the people they're having that affair with usurp their authority in whatever capacity, and usually those are those at the lower end of the organization in terms of, not necessarily lower end, but you get what I'm saying. The lower end of maybe not at the staff level, the chief's level, the leader's level. Sometimes there could be office assistants, patrol deputies, officers. Doesn't really matter. But then a lot of times those leaders find themselves in a precarious position where they can't say or discipline or do anything in reference to the person they're having a relationship with. But invariably, that subordinate will always usurp that authority over all the other subordinates and make sure that it's known that they get what they want. The discipline doesn't apply to them. There are two sets of rules between them and the general population of the employment at that organization. And I have seen that across the board. I've taught with officers. I've dealt with officers. I myself have worked at two different agencies. And human nature is human nature, and it's the same processes that kind of rule the day, right? Here's what the rules and regulations say, and this is for everybody that's not in a clique. This is for everybody that doesn't play the office politics. This is for everybody that's not having an affair or doesn't necessarily know where all the bones are buried, so to speak, with a leader. And so some of those folks get to kind of do whatever they want to do. They're involved in misconduct, whether it's DUI, wrecking, taxpayer patrol vehicles, and then the leaders a lot of times will cover those misdeeds or misconduct up. But for the rest of the employment population on that organization, they don't get the same liberties, and they shouldn't get the same liberties. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. So when I was running for the chief of police position for the city of Mobile, there was apparently, there was a lot of staff members that applied for that job, and everybody thinks they should get the job, right? And so whoever the guy or lady that gets the job, if it's an in-house promotion, invariably everybody else that didn't get the job feels some kind of way. They absolutely do. And then they start criticizing and all this other, with the person that did get the job. But I said that to say this, that I was the only staff member that actually took it upon myself to go out to the rank and file and really find out what the problems were. I wanted to write my strategic plan to be able to address the systemic problems that I had dealt with at that time, some 24, 25 years before I was promoted to chief. Mobile PD has always had a systemic attrition problem, but in the end part of 2021, we lost 101 officers. And part of the mayor, the mayor's recommendation to me was he wanted two things: reduce crime, reduce attrition. And so we had a record number of attrition. So I knew, prior to even going into that interview, what the task was going to be, because you can't do this job without getting buy-in from those at the bottom, so to speak, of the rank and file, the very patrol officer, slick sleeve, if you will, the supervisors, even the command staff. You've got to get everybody bought in to be able to push the mission of that agency and to accomplish the goal. And we knew it was a task, right? Almost 750 employees with the Mobile Police Department. But the problem wasn't so much that we were having civilians leaving. Maybe with operators, we had a huge problem, and I think maybe they still do for varied reasons, okay? But strictly dealing with officers in the field is what I'm talking about. So I took it upon myself before writing my strategic plan, and I went out and talked to a couple of dozen officers. I called them at the gas pumps, called them coming after a call. And the idea is that I wanted to find out, what is the problem? How do we make MPD the best? Because if it is the best, then that will manifest itself out when these officers are out in the field dealing every day with the average everyday citizens, trying to resolve problems and responding to calls. So it was important to me, and invariably what it come down to, I got a whole lot of responses of what some rookies, senior officers, and everybody in between, kind of what they thought the problem was with the discontent and people and officers not being happy with their employment with the Mobile Police Department. And so as I looked into it, I think invariably it really come down to three things. It come down to a lack of leadership. And my friend, leadership starts at the top of the organization. Leadership does not trickle up, it trickles down. You know this. But unfortunately, what we found, and some of these officers are right, that the leadership, it was self-serving. Every leader that has promoted through the ranks always invariably say, when I get to a position, I can change this, whatever that problem is that's negative, adversarial, or creates a toxic work environment. They all say it. I said it. But when they get in those positions, they cower down because of whatever the leader's direction or issues are, and they're not always above board and operating the way I did. So then they start to cower down for fear that they're going to lose a promotion, lose a rank, lose pay, and I get it. I completely get it. Excuse me. It violates the oath of office, but I completely get it. I understand why people have families to take care of. But invariably what I found out, it comes down really to three things: leadership. The rank and file didn't feel like that there was real truth and transparency and fairness and equity when it come to a host of things. Discipline was a big deal. Promotions were a big deal. Officers being transferred to various assignments. It's no secret that A lot of these assignments and these police departments are considered premier positions or good positions that may come with significant amount of overtime that certainly raises the standard of living for a lot of officers. But invariably, what I found is if you were tight with the chief or some high-ranking staff member, you pretty much got whatever you wanted, irrespective if you were a good officer or not. I subscribe to a different mindset. I told you on one of the first episodes that we did that there's two types of officers that get ahead in law enforcement, and I think it's safe to say in government work. Those that are merit-based, and that's the smaller population, they're just very fortunate. They keep quiet. They do the things they're supposed to do to kind of, wield their influence and get to the top. And then the bigger populations, those that just ride coattails, butt kissers, brown nosers, you can call them whatever you want. I know that's not politically correct, but we keep things real here on the Primetime Podcast. We're not going to deviate from truth and transparency, and that's what it is. Now, the officer that moves ahead, gets the assignments or escapes, discipline because of all the things we've already talked about, they're not going to tell you they're the brown noser. They're not going to tell you that they're the people that I'm talking about because nobody wants to be that people. But it's the truth. And for all the average, everyday people out there that are not in law enforcement in any capacity, a support role or otherwise, stop and talk with these officers, deputies on the side of the road and ask them, hey, did you watch Primetime Podcast? If you didn't watch it, I'd like to ask you a question. And I guarantee you, invariably, they're going to tell you it's the same problem because it's dealing with government work. And in government work, it's the most inefficient, ineffective organization on the planet. It's the only place where you can get a job, operate, make a living, and not be held accountable to do the very thing that you were employed to do. That's a fact. Saying that to say this, when it comes to leadership, a lot of leaders, I think they're not prepared to handle, I think in many regards, the responsibility and accountability that comes with it. But most of the time, they're not promoted for that accountability and responsibility. They're promoted because the boss thought that they had some type of blind loyal to them, irrespective of the ask or the demand that maybe the boss would give them. Listen, I have always said a subordinate must always, I don't care if it's the private sector or the public sector, the subordinate must always jump the hoops and hurdles for the boss. The exception is if the boss requires you to do something criminal, unethical, or immoral that violates your moral compass. And yes, I talk about the means does not justify the ends when it comes to overlooking corruption. That means whatever you got to do, overlook, turn a blind eye to because it may be not advantageous for you. No, that's unacceptable. That's why we take an oath of office as a police officer, because people far smarter than us years and years ago said, look, a good public servant must take an oath of office publicly to demonstrate their willingness to uphold the rule of law. And that don't just go for law enforcement officers, it goes for anybody. But we also found not only in leadership that we needed to up the training of leadership for certainly the command staff of the police department, and I agreed with that, but I think we also need to show truth and transparency to the rank and file. And I'm going to give you an example of that. But some of the other things that when we talk about fairness, and we're talking about discipline. And, I'm not going to get into it, just for brevity's sake, but I believe the federal government's Office of Personnel Management uses, and it comes from a lawsuit, but it uses what they call the Douglas factors. And, in summation, the Douglas factors is how do you go about being fair and equitable when you're applying discipline to, government employees? And so I did implement that with the police department because I have been the victim of being heavy-handed with discipline because I was never in anybody's clique. And so, well, if you're just one of the rank and file, okay, you give them 3 days off for a vehicle accident, true story. Then you had some officers that maybe were really, really good friends with the chief at the time and DUI and several times roll their car off the interstate and they get a new car and virtually nothing ever happens to them. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Officers are willing to work for low compensation so long as they know that the benefits are there, such as insurance, time off, certainly a really good retirement, and that the processes are fair. I have learned most men and women don't want to play the office politics. They have families to take care of. They want to come to work. They want to do the job for you, the people that they signed up, the public. They signed up to do a job, and this is what they want to do. And they don't want to play the office politics. That's what I found when I found out leadership, no fairness and equity with all these disciplines and transfers and promotions. Transfers to really good assignments where you got to be friend with a top-ranking brass member. You got to be good friends with the chief of police. And sure, it goes on, I'm sure, in every organization. But unfortunately, in the private, or unfortunately in government service, we're not for profit. But the problem is we're promoting people or giving people things that they want because of blind loyalty doesn't serve you, the public. That means that you can expect not to get quality service from some of these officers or deputies, and that's the fact. It's hard enough trying to get qualified officers, deputies, and correction officers to do the job, let alone have to come in through the front door and then deal with all the office politics, the bowing down, the kissing of the ring. People, I'm just being real with you today. Because we need men and women on the front line of society separating the criminals from the law abiding. That's the fact. We're not even gonna water that down in any kind of way. But you talk about promotions. Pardon me. You talk about promotions. I've seen the promotion process under the Mobile County Personnel Board system. And every agency has its own code of conduct and how they handle promotions. The Mobile Police Department simply, and I'm just going to give you a real quick example. The officers go and they take a promotional exam with the personnel board. And that personnel board ranks these officers in a file. And they typically have what's called a rule of 10. So for every one position, you get 10 names from the personnel board. And then so once you get those names, if you're going to promote X amount of positions, you get that list. And so the Mobile Police Department has had a long practice of doing in-house interviews or screening. And there were factors as a part of that the staff officers interviewing these subordinates would have to grade and check off. And it was simply the situation, about stability, about what your education level was, your experience, how well you were able to articulate that experience. And while that was good, the process could still be manipulated. So I knew that when I came in, I had to put a fair process in place, and we put a grading system in place, and everybody knew it. I was very transparent about it. So when we put that committee together, I gave the instructions for the committee. This is how we grade them. We use the rules and regulations, and we continue to use the process that we've always used when we were promoting, but we just put a numeric system together as a part of that process. And I had to get buy-in from the staff to do it. Now, I want you to think about this. I had a good friend of mine, and he gave me permission to use this. I won't call his name, but he is a fantastic guy, great officer, a stud, if you will. But been a 30-year friend of mine, if not longer, maybe 34, 35 years. We started our careers essentially together. But he came in for a promotion. Man, he looked good, smelled good, felt good. But before these candidates came in for their in-house screening interview, me as the chief sent out the information, i.e. my strategic plan, because as I told you before, I was the first chief that ever taught the strategic plan to the rank and file. How else do you know if you're going to down the road to get to that location unless you know how you're going to get there? And I taught that strategic plan. And I gave that plan to those candidates to come in to do their interviews. And yes, he was my friend. Listen, this guy came in, he looked good, he smelled good. He fit the epitome of a fit officer squared away. But he went into that interview and he was not prepared. Listen, my strategic plan, I think, was 12 or 13 pages, 9 pages total if you take out the index and a few pictures. And I don't know if maybe he thought, because we were friends that, he would get that promotion irrespective. But after that interview, that staff came in to me and they were all in agreement and said, look, Chief, we know he's your friend. We know you want him promoted. But guess what? He didn't know your plan. Now, I had a decision to make, and this is integrity. I could have done like every other chief, said, well, don't worry about it. He's my boy. I probably wouldn't have said that, but I said, he's my boy. You go ahead and promote him. But understanding, and the military guys, you understand this, there are second and third order of effects with every decision that you make, or consequence with every decision that you make, especially in these type of organizations. And incidentally, I had a decision to make, and I could be like every other chief that came before me and did whatever they want to do, which created more discontent, more problem, more lack of fairness, equity, and transparency. Or I could have been different, and I did. I stood on my principle, and I said, well, if he didn't know the plan, you grade him respectively. If he doesn't fall within the promotable range, he's out. Now, as you can imagine doing that, that's in a ripple effect, a positive ripple effect down the rank and file that says, hey, we, for the first time, have a chief of police that's going to do right by the men and women, irrespective of his relationships or his positions or influence with, certain people, staff members, or officers on this department. And that was important to me because I need the buy-in, and not only the staff that knows that I was a man of my word, but I also needed the rank and file to say, to look at me and say, we're going to follow you, because you build trust, you build transparency, and you're being fair and equitable with everybody. I did have a lady on the mayor's campaign ask me, she says, do you believe in the DEI policies, and would you put one in place? I said, yes and no. Yeah, I believe in diversity, equity, inclusion. I believe that everybody should be treated fair, irrespective of who they are, their beliefs, their creed, their religion. I do. I believe we treat everybody with fairness and dignity and respect. I don't have to agree with you, especially on things of your life. I don't have to agree with that. But I don't think as employers and bosses that we should be using that as a catalyst to discriminate or prevent somebody or creating obstacles for people to move up in an organization, especially if they take their oath of office serious and they do all the things they're required to do to be good stewards of the people's money and authority. And so to me, that's very important. But I also, while I believe in DEI, I believe much like any other policy, when you put some policies in place like that, all you're doing is forcing the leaders to find a workaround to circumvent. Real leaders don't have to have a policy to do the right thing. But unfortunately, look at the rule book of the Mobile Police Department. It's that thick. And it's that thick because leaders didn't never do the right thing. They didn't do it by the rank and file. They didn't do it by themselves. And they certainly didn't do it by you, the voting public. And then, of course, communication. We found out that communication was a huge deal. Why was it such a big deal? Because people instinctively, and yes, even police officers, they have a propensity to hear something without vetting it, without understanding where the information is coming from, the source it's coming from. They take this communication one level down from the chief's office, and it gets so distorted about what the actual communication directive or the order was, and it creates a huge problem. To the extent in Mobile Police Department, I had TVs up in every facility across the city, police facility, and I called it the rumor mill. And somebody would put out a rumor. I'd put that rumor up there that it wasn't true. Here was the fact. And you know what it did? It shut down. It shut down all the nefarious players within the department that constantly do this thing as a matter of intention. Because nobody then wanted to be seen as their rumor getting put up on the rumor mill. So we drove that mess underground. And that's in part why we were able to turn attrition around 48%, partly. Certainly the other things that I talked about. We talked about rumors. I'll give you another one. There was this rumor. My sister's still with the Mobile Police Department, and she's a staff member. She's been on 34, 35 years. She's been on a long time. She's done her job. She's a former Marine. In many regards, coming up, she was one of my mentors. And but we talk about rumors, right? And so when she was coming up, the first promotion, the first set of promotions that I was involved in, she was a lieutenant applying for captain. And everybody says, oh, he promoted his sister because she's a captain. Absolutely not true. In fact, to the extent that I went to Jim Barber and I said, look, we already know how this is going to play out. I wanted to put an external board together, and we did. And he picked them. I think I picked one of the female staff members on there just so we could have a little diversity inclusion on the committee. But that was an external board that heard all of those candidates come in. And she by far, not because she was my sister, she had the most experience. She had the most extensive experience, and we're not just talking about in patrol. We're talking about a skill sets, homicide, major investigations. She's worked in community patrol, and I'm not justifying it for her, but I'm just saying that we had a judge on this board. We had a management consulting outside of the police department on this board. We had a retired assistant chief on that board, and we had a current female ranking officer on that board. And just like we did every other promotion, they graded them, they went in, and they come back, and she was number one on the overall promotable candidate list to be promoted to captain. Now, the question is, should she have been promoted to captain or not be promoted to captain because her brother was the chief of police? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But you understand what a real leader did. What I did was went and had a board put together with input from people outside of me that would be able to come in and evaluate all these lieutenants that were applying for captain, and she cut the rank. It had nothing to do with me. They gave me the list, and I was prepared to skip her if I had to, because I believe in character and integrity to that extent. So let's put that to rest. Some of the other things I think that are important is, the good old boy cliques are still in effect at all these agencies, and it's disingenuous, I think, because a lot of times these chiefs and assistant chiefs and upper ranking staff members don't realize that they're not showing favoritism or cliques in secret. Maybe sometimes they think they are, but the rank and file sees it. The rank and file absolutely sees it. And you have to be able to understand that every decision you make as a leader has a consequence, good or bad, within that rank and file. That's why we were able to reduce attrition some 48%. Listen, I don't believe in covering up officer misconduct. We talked about that before. Was the misconduct, was it incidental, intentional, and malicious? And I made it very clear to all the officers with the Mobile Police Department that malicious behavior, violating people's rights, doing things that are criminal, You know they're a criminal, you'll have no friend with the chief, and I stand firm on that. And I will stand firm on that as a Mobile County Sheriff. Matter of fact, true story, we had an officer that was involved in a DUI some years back, and I received a phone call from some of those in the field, supervisors. Hey, we stopped one of ours. I said, what would you do if it was anybody else? Well, we would arrest them. Have a good night. That may sound hard, but here's the thing. It doesn't mean that policing produces perfect officers. It does not. But the world is watching, and I believe that leaders, to the best of their ability, we can cut up behind the curtain and the veil, and we can, banner talk and all this other stuff. But when it comes to taking real official action, we have to stand our ground, stand on principle, because we are the living example of the rank and file, the men and women that are watching us. If you're systemically late and you're coming in an hour and a half early, how long do you think it takes before the rank and file starts? Says, well, the boss is doing it. You have to lead by example, and sometimes that is a hard proposition for a lot of people, even today, that are in some of these elevated positions. They have no business wearing a badge or a uniform, let alone being in some of the top positions that these people are in. That's a mess. And it's a mess, and it trickles down to you, the voting public, that just want us to do the thing that we took an oath to do, and that's protect and take care of you. So we talked about a lot. We talked about officer misconduct. I just think it's important that as we go and we look at some of these things about some of the internal problems, how I was able to fix a lot of that. I put a morale committee together, and there were no, we had corporals on it, but it was corporals and below, officers and corporals. And on that morale committee, we didn't have any mid-level supervisors, sergeants or lieutenants, or even staff members on it, because I wanted the rank and file to be able to meet with me as the head of the organization on a quarterly basis and tell me what the problems were. Now, again, that created a ripple effect. Some of the sergeants and lieutenants thought it was a meeting, because that's how rumors get started, right? It's a meeting for the guys out there doing the work, beating the street and turning corners and every single day, to come in and complain about them. But that's not what it was. It was about what the real problems were. Let me tell you what some of the real problems were. The real problems were is you get some of these mid-level supervisors that's been on 15, 20 years. They don't want to work anymore. In the law enforcement world, we call it retirement in place. So they go out there, they create problems, and the next time an officer goes to pull over a car that's casing out in the back of a commercial building, that officer is getting paid to be nosy, to find out what's going on, to prevent, intervene, or solve a problem. And then because they go out with a stop at 2 o'clock in the morning, and some of these officers or deputies are out sleeping, maybe even supervisors are, and they don't want to wake up and do their job. So what do? They go direct with that officer. They scold them, admonish them, do whatever they have to do, tell them to go sit under a tree, shut up, sit down, and don't do nothing. That's not leadership. That's not leadership. That is usurp your authority, using your position for your own benefit. Yes, even to sleep without being disturbed. I'm sorry. I know some of these guys are probably not going to want to hear it, but this is the type of thing that has to change. And if we're going to really have effective leadership in this county, it's got to start at the top of the organization. Listen, you've seen me as the chief of police, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the morning, I was there. If it required me to be there, I was there. And I expect every officer and every deputy that would work for me, especially in the future, to understand I take that oath very serious, and I know that most of them do as well. And I just think it's important that as we talk about that morale committee, we were able to fix a lot of systemic problems, little things. We were able to fix those little things within the department that created discontent. And if somebody did complain on a supervisor, it fell on deaf ears unless we kept hearing the same complaints from different officers on the same supervisor. And in that event, then we would go about trying to get maybe the supervisor. We never went in and just said, hey, we're going to admonish you. You're not a good supervisor. We just went in there and said, hey, we need to get you some training, whatever the case may be. And it wasn't adversarial at all. It's fixing problems. What I found with the Mobile Police Department is that when the rank and file stop bringing you a problem, they have essentially lost faith in your ability to lead. And as a leader in any part of society, any organization, public or private, as a leader, when you lose the trust and confidence of the people that are doing the work, you're defunct. That doesn't change. Your job as a leader is to fix problems. Unfortunately, what we find is that most leaders, they don't want no problems, no hiccups. And a lot of times, either laziness, but it also could be from staff members being heavy-handed with discipline because, one, they don't like you. Two, that officer got out there and did something, and he wrecked a car or whatever the case was, and we're going to hammer down on you as a sergeant or a lieutenant because your guy got out that did something. And I now look back over a 30-year career, a lot of that is intentional by those at the upper echelon of these organizations. It's designed to make an example because we don't want this to happen. And friends, let me just tell you something. 30 years in this business, officers are going to wreck cars. That's why they call them accidents. Now, we have to determine, was it incidental, intentional, or malicious, and those things do matter. But let me tell you, it's a big disservice to that rank and file when one guy can continue to get away with misconduct, whether it's domestic violence, drinking and driving, wrecking cars, versus a deputy or an officer that does all the right things, but incidentally backed into a tree because he didn't see it for whatever reason. And it really just depends on whether or not you're a part of that clique or not a part of that clique. I'm just telling you, the morale committee was huge for me. It took a while to get it going, but when the men and women of that morale committee realized they could trust me to fix the problem, not snitch them, not throw them under the bus, there were a lot of things a lot of it was communication. They just didn't understand why we did certain things within the police department. So it gave me as the chief an opportunity to give them a different perspective. We all operate on opinions and perspectives if we don't know. I always say perception is like a sliding scale. Everybody has an opinion and it's based on their own perception, but that's based on how you receive the communication, what you know about the communication, the facts, or hearsay. And yet we all go popping off at the gums about things we know nothing about. There were times you talk about fairness and equity with discipline. There were times where as a rookie captain, I would call my boss, and I didn't really care for him a whole lot, but he was a smart guy. He really was a smart guy. We didn't care, but we worked together. He probably didn't like me either, if you want to know the truth. But the reality was I was struggling over some discipline. Did I give punitive discipline or action time off to an officer for doing thing, or did I go a little bit lighter on him, and it's based on the preponderance of evidence according to the rule books, which is what we're guided by. Unlike Kenyon Brown, we don't just do whatever we want to do. We don't do that. But as we look at the actions of the officer, and I'm sitting here battling it, and that commander told me one day, he said, you're going to find that you care more about some of these guys' careers than they do. And if they get in there and do something unlawful, criminal, or malicious, he said, whatever the prescribed rule is for discipline, that's where we go, because you're the one handing out the discipline, or you're the one that's handling that investigation. But he was right. If they don't care enough about how they operate and function off duty or even on duty, it's not my responsibility to go and clean it up when I myself have to be held to the same standard they are. And even as a captain, even as a major, I got accused of being heavy-handed because I held people accountable. What does the rule say? What does the law say? And trying to use these Douglas factors, if you will, was your conduct intentional? And you would be surprised, because instinctively nobody wants to be wrong. That's the hardest thing with all of us. Listen, I'll tell you, none of us, it's a human behavior, none of us like authority. Oh man, you mean police don't? Absolutely. Police officers don't like authority either. But if you want to be the chief of police, you got to first learn to be a good soldier. You got to first learn to follow the rules and regulations. That's a fact. We don't like when Alabama Power says that the bill's due on the 15th. And he ain't going to fuss and raise sand with us. You don't pay your bill, you're probably going to get it turned off, or you're going to get some type of heavy fee to go with it the next time you pay your bill. So I learned a long time ago, if we're going to be in the service industry, we have to learn to follow rules and regulations. And what I have found, that I think the rank and file, not just law enforcement, but certainly everything that I've said is applicable to civilians that play a support role, operators, dispatchers that play that same role, correction officers. They want to come, provide a living for their family, and be successful in this organization. And my strategy was such that it was merit-based. And in being merit-based, if you really want that good assignment, that good transfer, that promotion, it's merit-based, and everybody is applied and everybody is graded on that same level. You don't have to like the boss. Do the job that you took an oath to do. You didn't take that oath to a fault for the sheriff, or to a fault to be loyal to the chief of police. You took that oath of office to serve the public without fear and intimidation. And that's the big deal to me. Oh, Brian, you're just corny. Well, maybe I'm corny, but I took that oath very serious. A lot of it has to do with the way I was raised. But just understanding that some people want to just come and do it. So my system was merit-based. You do everything you're supposed to do. You compete equally and equitably across the field. And I'm not talking about equity and some of this old political garbage. I'm talking about real equity. Everybody has the same standing. Everybody can succeed if you do these things that benefit the public and benefit this organization to take us to the next level. But the truth is true too. There's a place in every organization for those that just want to be marginal. But with a plan such as mine, you know you're marginal, and there may be a place for you, but you know not to expect anything other than whatever it is that you're getting. And one last thing I'll say before we conclude, and I appreciate your patience. It was important for me to get this information out. The backbone with any law enforcement organization truly is the field work, the patrol work. And a lot of times the men and women that come into law enforcement after a few years, they want to get out of it. A lot of it has to do with shift work, and I get it. Of course, they make all these promises. Oh, I'll do whatever I got to do until they get in there. And then sometimes we hold back the veterans because of personality conflicts with a brass or a top senior officer that didn't want me in this special assignment or didn't want me to get that promotion. And we push that senior officer down, and then we'll elevate a 1.5, 2-year rookie and put them in some of the premier positions when they don't even know how to write a police report yet. And that's not to cascade a dispersion on them. That's just simply saying they haven't. It takes about 5 to 7 years for a good patrol officer to really understand and how to apply the law in virtually every circumstance that they're going to deal with out there in the field. It takes a while. And we do a lot of these young officers a big disservice when we take them under our wing and we think, oh, we're going to mentor them. No, you're really not. What you're doing is showing the rank and file that this is my friend. I'm going to elevate them to a position. And that 10 or 15-year officer that's got pushed down because he's a truth teller, because he's about transparency and about doing things the right way, well, sometimes that scares these leaders. It doesn't scare me. I challenge everybody. It's me against me. Am I better than I was yesterday? There's nobody out here in society that is my competition for anything. Same will be said for the sheriff's race. Paul Birch is not my competition. My competition is me. My competition is me getting out here showing the world that I can bring something better to the Mobile County Sheriff's Department. Listen, my friends, I appreciate your time. Again, a lot of this was for those with institutional knowledge of what we're talking about, but I think it's very important that they hear the type of leader that I am. And for those deputies out there, those correction officers and civilians out there, go out there and talk with some of these MPD officers. Maybe not some of the higher executive staff members, because they were held to the same standard that me and the rank and file was, but you certainly go out there and talk with these line officers out here in the field, and you're going to find out exactly that everything I told you today is truth and it's transparency. Because I remember crawling through the rank and saying to myself, when I become the chief of police, I'm going to make it better. I'm going to make it different. My friends, I did that very thing. It cost me something as a man of character and integrity, but if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing, because at the end of it, I still have to live with me. Let me just simply say this. As I always say and conclude, we love you. And Lord willing, if the creek don't rise, we'll see you again on the next episode.